What was the worst part of the Vietnam War for a Navy corpsman or an Army medic? Was it the bloodshed, losing your friends, being in constant fear, the booby traps, the Viet Cong, the jungle? Or is it something more simple, such as not knowing if the people you treated lived or died? Hi, welcome to the channel. Today I'm reacting to a video from the Vietnam veteran experience. This is the worst part of Vietnam for a Navy corpsman. The reason why I chose this video is because I want to start reacting to more veteran stories and interviews and podcasts, and because I did deploy to Iraq as a combat medic, so I feel like I can relate to a story. Let's get to it.
So I graduated high school in Bend, Oregon, in 1965, and at that time, the Gulf of Tonkin incident was fresh in everyone's memory, and there was a draft, and so for me it was, and I was kind of sick and tired of school. I said, "Yeah, this school thing, I'm not sure I really like this anymore."
I do not remember the Gulf of Tonkin incident. If someone wants to remind me in the comments, I would appreciate it. The United States draft system was actually a lottery based on your birthday, similar to how the Aussies did it when they did their Vietnam draft.
And there's a draft, so I say, okay, it's pay me now or pay me later. Either you go in the military now, or you're going to pay, or you're going to get drafted later, which may or may not have been true. But so I knew the war was going on, so I said to myself, well, the Viet Cong don't have any Navy, so I'm going to go in the Navy and avoid getting killed in this war, which may be true for the Marines or for the Army personnel. Little did I know that when I went to boot camp, the Navy had other ideas for me because I originally wanted to go into a rating in the Navy as a quartermaster because I like maps, and the quartermaster is the guy that charted and get those charts out. And, okay, this is where the ship is. This is where we're going to go,
In the U.S. Army, quartermaster is actually supply, which is what my husband actually does.
And so I had great thoughts about that. When I had aptitude tests that were done in boot camp, I think there were 8 exams for math, science, biology, other skills, clerical skills, as well as reading. And I scored, because I'd taken 5 years of math in high school, calculus, trigonometry, analytical geometry. I scored virtually a perfect score in math, and that made me score very high in electronics, which was a brand new rating in the Navy, electronics technician. So in the interview just before boot camp ended, the guy I had an interview like 2 weeks before boot camp ended, and he says, "Boy, you scored real high in science and all this math stuff. So we really want you to be an electronics technician." And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about that. I just like maps, So it kind of ended in a little bit of an argument, a disagreement about, okay, I want to chart maps. No, we want you to be an electronics technician. So when my orders came out and I found out what they were really all about, I figured this was my punishment for disagreeing with the Navy not being an electronics technician, because as I told some of the guys in last night at our meeting last night, at dinner last night, that I had a friend who was from the Virgin Islands in boot camp, Archibald Wilberforce, I believe his name was, and they have this melodious way of speaking the English language. And I'm looking at these orders that say Hospital Corps School, and I had no idea what that was. I says, well, but it's still going to be in San Diego. You're just going from one part of San Diego to the other. And Archie looked at that, and in this beautiful voice, he said, "You know what that means? You're gonna die." I said, "What do you mean? You're going to, oh, let me tell you, you're going into combat with the Marines, I'm in the Navy. How can I go into combat?" "Well, let me tell you, the Marine Corps has no medical or dental personnel of their own. They purge them from the Navy. So you kind of go through a second draft, a draft again, where the Marine Corps says, send us this many corpsmen, this many nurses, this many orthopedic surgeons. And so that was my fate. I went to hospital corps school in San Diego, uh, and they sent me to Camp Pendleton, where we spent about 5 or 6 weeks running up and down the hills with packs on our backs and being taught about emergency first aid. And then took the flight from Travis Air Force Base outside of Oakland.
So after completing his basic corpsman course, he went on to San Diego to actually gain the skills necessary to deploy with the Fleet Marine Force. That course today is called the Field Medical Service Technician course, and it is taught at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina and runs about 8 weeks.
Over to Okinawa, spent about a week there vaccinating a lot of the Marines, going back because they made use of the corpsmen for purposes of vaccinations, because we had to give them, typhoid, typhus, cholera, gamma globulin for hepatitis, malaria, a yellow fever. So there was a bevy of 7 or 8 different vaccinations each person had to receive. And then you had to wait 3 days to make sure they didn't have an anaphylactic reaction to any of the vaccines. And then you'd be cleared. So finally, after about a week there at Okinawa, they sent me, and I landed November 15, 1966, in Da Nang. And they took me, they said, okay, your orders are to go down to Chu Lai to what was Charlie Medical Battalion. Little did I know, Charlie Med was about to be moved a few weeks later to Da Nang. So I spent precious little time, maybe 3 or 4 weeks at Charlie Med in Chu Lai, and then it was changed to 1st Medical Battalion in Da Nang outside of Hill 327. That was sometime right around Christmas. I think we were changed over there. So I was basically in field hospitals like the TV series MASH.
I was at the Ibn Hospital in Baghdad, which was a private hospital that Saddam actually had for him, his family, and his supporters. I was with the 10th Combat Support Hospital, or CASH, which is very similar to a MASH unit.
For that period of time. And then in late February, I think 2-5 got short on corpsmen. They had corpsmen that were wounded or killed, and they purged a couple of us from 1st Medical Battalion and said, okay, we're going to send you over to 2-5. So that's where I ended up at Hotel 2-5 for the first time. I ended up going back there again in June or July, I think, for a second time. When I first got there, one of the Marines says, Doc, you don't want to carry that Unit 1. The Unit 1, I have it in my garage at home. It was the first aid kit issued by the Marine Corps to corpsmen. But it was unique in its size and shape. So the enemy would say, you need to kill that. There's 4 guys you want to kill. The officer in a platoon of 60, 70 men. The officer, the radioman, and the 2 corpsmen. They're the hard targets that you want. So you have to disguise yourself.
Just like the Japanese during World War II, the Vietnamese did not follow the Geneva Convention, which is why even today that us medics and corpsmen never wear any kind of Red Cross insignia on our uniform.
So the lieutenant would take his bars off and say, I'm not going to wear my shiny bars to tell that I'm the officer. The corpsman would say, okay, I'm not going to have a Unit 1. In my case, I took an ammo bag, which was something that would ordinarily carry rockets in it. And it was larger, too. It was larger so I could carry more medical supplies. And the radioman was the guy that couldn't disguise himself. Remember, we were talking last night about there's a 3-foot antenna, and then there's the 10-foot one that's just waving in the wind. Here, shoot this. Shoot what, aim 6 feet below and fire off a round,
The life expectancy of a radio man in combat in Vietnam was anywhere from 5 to 30 seconds.
So, so it was the radiomen. I thought were the most vulnerable of those of us in our platoon. There was a lot of time spent after hours, especially on trench foot. I found I had a grave concern about the treatment of the feet of the men because you'd get this fungus, because you're exposed to the water all the time, and trying to dry out your boots every night and dry out your socks. Even more importantly, drying out your socks. You try to leave them out in a breeze if you could. Your boots and your. I try to instruct the men to do that when they were in bunkers. Because
trench foot only occurs when your feet are exposed to water and cold temperatures for an extended period of time. So the soldiers did not actually have trench foot, but they did have lots of problems with their feet, including fungus. If you ever saw that scene in the movie Platoon, then you could see that their feet got pretty effed up.
Because a lot of times the bunkers would they'd be water filled, from the rains that would be there. So a lot of that was treating that, or leeches that they had, because the leeches were prevalent in the country as well. A lot of guys would just burn them out, take a cigarette. Okay, okay, I'll teach this leech a lesson. So they do a self medication from a cigarette that would burn the leech and make it release its grip on your body. Those were the things after hours that I was mainly concerned about. The troubling thing about being in combat as a medic, or in our case, a hospital corpsman, is wondering if people survived. You see, and I remember this one guy, I think he was from Chicago, who was hit in the femoral artery, and you have no idea the femoral artery, it shoots a gusher about 3 feet up in the air, when you have, because the blood pressure is so great in the femoral, just like the aorta. And trying to hold this guy's femoral artery with my hands, and trying to keep the circulation there, but at the same time making sure he doesn't bleed to death, and waiting for a chopper to arrive, and then never knowing if he really survived or not. Yeah, so that's the thing, a recurring dream I have about twice a year. Is about this one guy, and I just never knew if he survived.
So I can relate to what he's saying. We saw a huge variety of patients in the hospital in Baghdad, including civilians and children. And I often think about if some of the patients with the more severe injuries actually survived or not. We once had a mass cow where some Marines were on foot doing a patrol, and an IED went off on the other side of a Humvee, and the blast went underneath the Humvee, and a corpsman and 6 Marines were actually injured. I think 6 out of the 8 lost both of their legs, and 2 of them actually lost one. It was horrific, and I still remember, being with them in the ICU with the nurses, and how they're intubated and completely unconscious. And then I remember getting them ready and bringing them downstairs on litters. And I remember loading some onto the helicopters. And I remember just myself and some nurses just standing there on the helipad, staring up at the bird as it took off. We just stood there for a few seconds in silence. Even today, I still wonder just if that corpsman and if those Marines even survived. And the ones who did survive, what is their life like today? I'm sorry.
Your concern is not so much for for Lyndon Baines Johnson or Robert McNamara, but for the guy next to you, the Marines that were next to you, and whether they survived, because I spent time teaching them my craft. I said, okay, there may be a time, gentlemen, where I get wounded, which turned out to be true, and you'll need to treat me, because the other corpsmen, there's essentially two corpsmen for a platoon of 60 to 70 men.
Can somebody remind me who Robert McNamara is? I'm guessing he was Secretary of Defense, maybe? The U.S. Army has the exact same mindset. We actually have a course called CLS, or Combat Life Saving, which basically is a battlefield first aid course for non-medics. Ideally, all Marines and soldiers should go through some sort of COS class, because what if you can't get a hold of a medic and your buddy is dying in front of you? Or what happens if your medic gets injured? It's pretty much common sense that everyone on the battlefield should have at least some first aid training, especially when it comes to controlling bleeding with tourniquets.
And we try to station ourselves about equidistance. If you got 70 men, you'd go about 15 from the back would be one corpsman and 15 from the front. So we'd be equidistant from any one of the Marines, so that was our thought process. Yeah. It was and a calm day in a war zone, if you can say that. And we were just walking on patrol, and I was just lucky, you swing your arms when you that my arm wasn't shot, but the entry wound was in my back, and it went diagonally across my body, so it went from way back here and then ended midline. So the bullet, it wasn't a through and through bullet. It stayed inside, pierced my lung, and of course you have a pneumothorax and hemothorax.
In layman's terms, he had a collapsed lung.
And so I was medevaced again to NSA Hospital, where I recuperated, had a chest tube as well, and I've got the, like a 20-inch scar, which was really prominent years ago, was very prominent, and it was keloided. It was very purple as well, that goes from midline all the way back here, so it follows the path of the bullet, so to speak, I was wounded in late March, only about a month after I got there. I was sent to NSA Hospital, where I recuperated there. They sent me back to 1st Medical Battalion, where I spent maybe 2 months there, and then 1st Medical Battalion sent me back to Anhua, back to Hotel 25, where I spent time there, and then they sent me to NSA Hospital, and then finally back to 1st Medical Battalion. So I was bouncing all over the country, or to different duty stations while I was there in Vietnam. A lot of people back home, well, how was Tet? I said, I missed it. I got home 2 months early before Tet, because Tet began, January 30, 68, I think was their Lunar New Year, their celebration for the Vietnamese. And I'd left the country in November 67, we landed in Los Angeles on December 22, 1967. There was a plane full of us. As I recall, United Airlines had the exclusive rights to fly GIs back and forth from Okinawa. So all of the people that were against the Vietnam War, they just call up you, hey, when's your next flight from Okinawa? We'd like to give a greeting to the Vietnam veterans. So we landed there, and we've got guys, some guys with amputations on the plane, and there are about 15 people. They were all women, and they were all white. And they threw blood on us and spit on us and called us baby killing. This is when using the word was okay, I guess, for these people.
This shameful behavior also happened to the returning Australian and New Zealand veterans as well. Australia had to start putting their soldiers in civilian clothes and having their planes arrive late at night because of the horrible people that would greet them at the airports. And this is in direct contrast to my experience when I went to Iraq in 2005-2006. When I was returning to Iraq after R&R leave, we're all lined up at the USO at Atlanta Airport, and we started walking down the hallway, and everyone below us in the airport just stood up. I'm not going to cry. Just stood up and just started applauding and just saying thank you, and they started cheering for us. And I'm so grateful and thankful for the support of the American people, and that's exactly the opposite of what happened to the Vietnam vets.
I had booked a flight, connecting flight to go to Portland when I landed in Los Angeles, but after the experience of the women that greeted us, I canceled the flight and decided to take a bus because I wanted to think about this. So I took a bus ride that took 2 days to get to Portland. So I arrived in Portland on Christmas Eve, and only then, and had to phone my parents and say, well, I'm taking a bus rather than a plane to get back to Portland because I wanted time to think about the experience of the treatment that I'd had,
Thank you guys so much for watching, and another reason why I chose this video is because I think Vietnam veterans' stories need to be told. We cannot forget what they did and what they sacrificed for our country. After all, they gave their tomorrow so we could have our today. My utmost respect to them. This video is about Vietnam. Once I react to another interview or podcast, I'll put it right here.